Hey, what's up everyone? Game Dad here, and in today's video, I am going to go through every single console generation and look at all of the major home console releases that came out during those different periods. And what I'm going to do while looking at all of those is give you my personal ranking on each and every one of those consoles. Now remember, as with any ranking or kind of review video, these opinions are my own, and yours may differ, and that's totally okay, but I would love to hear about it down in the comments below. So let's go ahead and dive in and check out all of the consoles all the way from Generation 1 up to the current generation, which is Generation 9.
So first up here for Gen 1, we have the Magnavox Odyssey. Now, widely considered to be the first true home video console, definitely a game changer and definitely what helped to kickstart video games and home consoles as we know them today. I have never personally owned one. They are quite expensive and obviously fairly rare, but this came out in September 1972 here in North America for, looks like $100 at the time, the equivalent of $700 as of 2022. Again, I have never been able to actually get one of these myself, but I have played on one, and it's cool for what it is. It's nothing mind-blowing by today's standards, but just because of what it is and its significance, I will actually still bring this up to a ranking of a C. Next up for Gen 1, we have the Atari Pong console. Now, originally you can see here it was an actual arcade machine, and that came out in 1972, but then in 1975 they came out with the Atari Pong home console. Now, they made a bunch of different kinds of these, but I do have one of the variations, and it does exactly what you would expect a Pong game to do. It gives you paddles to be able to hit the ball back and forth and, score on one side or the other. And overall, I mean, for what it is, just like the Odyssey, I mean, it was pretty revolutionary for its time, and it is still fun to play, but mainly because of its cultural significance, not necessarily because of what it's capable of doing. This one, it gets a C. Now, last up here for Generation 1, we have the Coleco Telstar series. Now, there was a bunch of different ones, and they were released anywhere from 1976 to 1978. I do not personally own any of the Telstar ones. I've seen them around, but never really taken the plunge to buy one myself. I've played a few different ones, but there are a ton of these. They are rare, and oftentimes, if you can find one working, they are still a bit pricey. But they were very niche things. Like, as you can see, you have the Telstar here that did hockey, handball, and tennis. The next one, the classic, did hockey, handball, and tennis. Then the deluxe did hockey, handball, and tennis. And finally, they added some more games here in 77 with Jai Alai. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but Target and Skeet. Then they kind of did variations on all of these all the way up until the end, when they came out with this last one, the Telstar Arcade, and this actually had some light gun kind of stuff to it, which was kind of cool. But overall, for me personally, I give this a D. Now here we start Generation 2 of home consoles, and this is the Fairchild Channel F, and this one is of great cultural significance because this was the very first system to ever actually have cartridge-based games. Everything else was always built in before, and this actually had cartridges that you could play. Now, there were a lot of different reasons why this ended up commercially failing, but if you want to check that out, go check out the Gaming Historian. He just did a really good video on the Channel F, and that would give you more information about that. But overall, it was the first cartridge-based console, which obviously many, many consoles after this did that. Cut that a bit. Which obviously many, many consoles use that kind of technology afterwards. But this is the Channel F. It came out in 1976 in North America, and because of, again, cultural significance, which is the kind of theme for a lot of these older consoles, I do not have one of these. I had a chance to get one a long time ago, and I just missed it, and it stinks because it was $50 for the console, a little unit to store it in, and a bunch of games. It was at a second-hand store, but somebody beat me to it, and every single one that I have found since then is hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get one that actually works. but back in the day, it went for 170 bucks, equivalent to $870 as of 2022. So pretty crazy pricing there. But overall, this one gets a C. Now, the next Gen 2 console we have here was obviously a massive, massive success. Came out in 1977, and that is the Atari 2600. And this is what is truly considered to be the first like real home console, because this is the one that was marketed very heavily. This is the one that came out with tons and tons of games, and because of this console, it spawned some of the biggest video game companies of all time that still exist today. And while, of course, it's very, very primitive by today's standards, this thing is still awesome. It's really fun to collect for because it's super cheap to collect for. And although the Atari 2600 made what was arguably the biggest investment into video games as we know it, for starting this industry, it was definitely responsible for also killing the industry before Nintendo came along and stuff. Now, this originally was released for $189.95, equivalent to $920 in 2022. But this had so many different games for it, and it came out in 1977. They were still releasing games for this console in 1992, which is absolutely insane. That's like around the time of the Super Nintendo. So very crazy that this was alive for that long, but overall I give this one a C. Up next for Gen 2, we have the Magnavox Odyssey 2. Now, this one I do own, and this was one of the very first, of the super old retro consoles that I ever got. And honestly, this thing is awesome. It is super fun. The games are very basic, but they are a lot of fun. And it was just a really cool console to find. It's very easy to find them still. They work very well, and they were just a very robust system. It was originally 179 bucks, or around $800 as of 2022, and it was really cool. It had also cartridge-based games, and it worked very well, and even had a full keyboard built into it, which was pretty cool. Now, this one, it does have a lot of cool stuff with it, but it had nowhere near the cultural significance of the original Odyssey. So with that in mind, I actually do give this one a ranking of a D. Up next, we have the Mattel Intellivision. And with this one, I actually got one of these whenever I was, I want to say probably 9 or 10 at a yard sale. There was a ton of games with it. And this is actually the only console where my mom ever actually played video games with me. She is not a gamer by any means. And she just kind of clicked with this console, and she always wanted to play games. I will say it was quite annoying because she always beat me anytime we played baseball, but super neat console, super interesting idea with the overlays and stuff like that on the controllers. Originally, this was released for $275 back when it released in 1979, which is quite expensive. I'm not sure what that is by today's standards, but that is an incredibly high price for this. But Intellivision is also the first console that had a voice module for games to actually have voice, which is really cool. But tons of games, huge library. There was a lot of intercompatibility with different accessories between this and Atari consoles, which was really cool. But overall, again, because of its simplicity, not necessarily its cultural relevance or anything like that, especially not today's cultural relevance because these are not the same companies. But overall, this gets a D. Next up here, we have the ColecoVision, and this is another really cool console, very much the same kind of concept as the Intellivision, except the graphics of this were on just another level compared to the Intellivision. They were full color, and the colors were way better, and the animations and sprites and everything that were in them looked a lot better. And just overall, this console was a really cool console. It came out in 1982. It had a lot of really neat accessories and modules that you could add onto it. And overall, this one for me gets a C. So up next here, we have the Atari 5200, which obviously is the successor to the 2600. And other than being at the time the largest console that I owned up until the PS5 came out, this really wasn't that great of a console. The joysticks are absolute garbage on Atari 5200 controllers. They need to be replaced and repaired constantly. The games were basically just rehashed versions of the 2600 games, and honestly weren't even that much better. I mean, it looks like right here it says they sold 1 million units, which by console standards is garbage. It had a couple of cool accessories. It was a little bit more powerful. It just, overall, it's not that good of a system, and I did not really collect a ton of stuff for this, but this came out in 1982, so it was a few years later, and by today's standards, that's, you know, a common time for a new console to come out, but it was just not very good, and this console, in my opinion, gets a D. Now, to start off Generation 3, we have the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES. Now, unless you have been living under a rock, you have heard of the NES. Everybody's heard of the NES. The NES basically became a verb for when your mom or dad or grandparents were talking about a video game. Oh, you gotta get the Nintendo. You need the Nintendo. Everything is always about the Nintendo. And obviously, they're doing quite well for themselves still today, but the NES, originally released as the Famicom in Japan, was in 1983, and then the actual NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, came to the US in 1985. I'm not going to talk about, you know, pre-releases in New York and stuff like that. For mainstream, it was 1985, but obviously this console is just, it's absolutely amazing. It was groundbreaking, everything about this. And love it or hate it, the Nintendo seal of quality ensured that we didn't have another video game crash. And this is basically why video games exist today, is Nintendo and the entertainment system. It really just made everything grow exponentially. And the system is absolutely just phenomenal. I can always play an NES game and always have a ton of fun. And yeah, I mean, it's the NES. What more can I say? I give this a ranking of A. Next up for Gen 3 is the Sega Master System. Now, I never had one of these growing up or anything like that, and I did not get one until way later in life and way after I started like collecting and getting a bunch of games and consoles and stuff. But the Master System is actually a pretty banging console. This thing is super powerful. The games look amazing. The sound quality on the Master System it just blows everything else out of the water from that era, and the console is just so good. It just, in my opinion, looks so dumb. It was such a weird shape, weird graphics on it, but the games themselves and everything else, it is a super awesome console. I have a few of them in my collection for ones that I've repaired and restored and things like that, but overall, very awesome system. I have much more of an attachment to the NES over the Master System, and with that being said, the Master System for me gets a B. Last up for Gen 3, we have the Atari 7800. Now, in my opinion, Atari should have just skipped the 5200, which was total garbage, and gone straight to this, because the 7800 is actually a phenomenal system. The games that they ported over to this and gave graphics updates to were way better on the 7800. The games are super fun on this. They look amazing on this console. I mean, for what they are, of course. This was no NES, this was no Master System, but it was still a very powerful and very cool console for the time. And this was just a really cool thing to get for the collection. It's also so much smaller with so much more horsepower put into it than the 5200. I don't know what they were thinking with that, but this one, it's really cool. It just doesn't have the same kind of star power that the Nintendo and Sega consoles had. So this one for me gets a C. Alright, and kicking off Gen 4, we have the TurboGrafx 16, also known as the PC Engine. And this one used a card-based system instead of cartridges or discs or anything like that, called HuCards. And they were actually really cool. It's a very neat concept. It's very easy to store a lot of these games. It's just unfortunate that a lot of the games for this system, the ones that are super fun, also happen to be insanely expensive. And this became more known as like the shoot 'em up kind of console. They had amazing arcade shooters on this, and it was a super cool console for what it was. It had a neat design. It had some cool add-ons. They ended up making a CD add-on for it, and those kind of things are really cool, but it is very price locked in today's world if you are collecting for it. But overall, still, because of its significance and because of what it was capable of doing, this one definitely gets a B from me. Up next, we have the Sega Genesis. Now, I had friends in my neighborhood growing up that they had a Genesis, I had an NES, and we would always go to each other's houses, play on the different consoles. And the Genesis was more the like edgy console, the more like cool kid console, and the graphics were more like colorful and more contrast to them, and it was a super fun system. Now again, I was more of a Nintendo kid growing up, but I can definitely appreciate the significance of the Sega Genesis and just what it brought to the gaming industry and to the gaming world. And the Genesis is amazing. There are so many amazing games, and then even today people are making new homebrew games and indie games and all kinds of stuff for this super old console. I mean, it came out in North America in 1989, and there are still people now in 2023 making games for this console, which is just crazy. But overall, this console for me gets an A. And next up, we have the Neo Geo. Now, they had two different versions of this. They had the MVS, which was the arcade machines, but then they had the AES, which was for home play. And basically, that just meant that you had an arcade machine with cartridges in your home. I mean, the cartridges were actually like almost the same size for the AES as they were the MVS. And very cool, very high end, very, very expensive. I mean, it's insanely expensive now, and it was even more expensive then. It came out originally costing, about $650 back in the day, and that's about $1,400 as of 2022. Nowadays, they're more expensive than that to find. This is definitely, if you are rich and want to collect something, go for it, because all the games are expensive, the system is expensive, the accessories are expensive, and although it was arcade perfect at home at this time, it came out in 1990 or the end of 1990 in North America, so it was unheard of to have that kind of gaming quality in your home. Very cool, very neat, very expensive. I give this a C. And to round off Gen 4 of home consoles, we have what is arguably the greatest console ever released in terms of its library, of when it came out, of its power, and that is the Super Nintendo, or in Japan, the Super Famicom. This console is absolutely amazing. It had so many firsts as far as graphics, as far as gameplay and storytelling and genre creation, and just the IPs that came and stemmed from this console. This is an absolutely amazing system, and it has a fantastic and massive library and doesn't necessarily break the bank, except for some of the really rare titles. But overall, this system is absolutely phenomenal, and it gets a ranking of S. For the start of Gen 5, you're going to have to do the math, because here we have the Atari Jaguar, the first 64-bit system, or as Atari would have you believe, the first 64-bit system. It didn't technically come out that way, but overall, it was Atari's final attempt at coming out with a home console, and it did very, very poorly. It had a CD add-on, but the games just weren't good. There's a couple that are okay, like Tempest is pretty fun, the Alien vs. Predator game is pretty fun, but overall, it's just really not a good console. The controller, in my opinion, is total garbage. They were still using controller overlays in 1993 when this came out, and it was not good. It was notoriously horrible to program for, and just overall not a good console. And for me, this one gets a D. Up next is the Sega Saturn. And while this one didn't necessarily do very well, it was still a really cool system. And I mean, graphically, it was amazing. It looked very, very good. It was just really expensive. I mean, for the time, it was a $400 console. And that was just too pricey for what it was based on everything else that was coming out at the same time. And although it has a lot of really, really cool games, in my opinion, the Japanese library is better than the North American one. They just got way more for it. It was way more popular outside of the US, and they had a lot of really cool stuff going on with that. But overall, I mean, the Sega Saturn, it's okay, but it gets a C. Up next is the PlayStation 1, and my ranking will probably not be very popular for this, but I did not have one of these growing up. I ended up getting one later on, but I would always play at friends' houses, and while there were still a lot of games that I really liked on this, I was not a huge fan of the original PlayStation. It was very just mediocre and okay, in my opinion. And outside of a few fun games, I was still more of a Nintendo person than I was a Sony person. So overall, for me, the original PlayStation gets a C. And last up for Gen 5, we have the N64, Nintendo 64. And this console, for me personally, I do really like this console. I absolutely recognize that it had a small library. It was a major commercial flop. But it had a lot of really cool stuff, and it was Nintendo's first foray into true 3D games. Yeah, PlayStation did it, and PlayStation did it better in my opinion, but it was still a groundbreaking console, and it does have really, really amazing games on it. If you count, like, you know, maybe a top 10 of the games, because then after that, the games aren't that great. However, this was the one system that I really remember really wanting as a kid and never being able to get. And now that I collect things, I've actually almost completed an entire global set of every single N64 game that has ever come out. I'm very close to having the entire set. And I guess that's just my way of reliving a childhood that I didn't get to experience with this console. But overall, because of the just overall commercial failure and how not all the games are great, there's only a handful of really great games on here in my opinion, this console still gets a C. And starting off Gen 6, we have the Sega Dreamcast. And this was Sega's final console, and honestly, I wish it wasn't, because this console was absolutely amazing. Came out in 1999 in the US, and this console was way ahead of its time. It was a 128-bit console. It had broadband connectivity. You had the VMUs, which would have extra functionality. It had amazing titles and amazing games. Graphically, it was awesome. The cost really wasn't that bad. It was $200, and it was just so good, in my opinion. This was such a cool console, and they had a lot of really cool games on it, but commercially, it was like the final nail in the coffin as far as hardware goes for Sega. And that's really unfortunate, because if this would have done better, we'd probably still have Sega consoles today coming out, and that would have been cool to see. But yeah, the Dreamcast, in my opinion, was a very cool console, and it gets a ranking of B. Up next is another one of the greatest consoles ever released, and I believe still to this day, the highest selling console of all time, and that is the Sony PlayStation 2. Now, I didn't care for the PS1 all that much. I love the PS2. The library on this system is absolutely just insane. It is massive. And if you add in Japanese exclusives, oh my god, just thousands and thousands of games. And it is such a fun console. It had so many cool things. This was the first time I had ever played actual like online multiplayer on a console. I remember playing, I think it was SOCOM 3 online, and it was just crazy that I could play a game with somebody on the other side of the planet, like from my TV. Sure, you could do that kind of stuff on PC and stuff, but it wasn't the same. This was on a home console. It was different, and it was awesome. And the PS2, it went through a few iterations and stuff, but such an amazing console. This one gets a ranking of S. Up next, we have the Nintendo GameCube, and although commercially I guess this would be considered a flop, I still thought it was really cool. It has one of the greatest controllers, in my opinion, of all time. It is so comfortable and widely preferred by many, many gamers the world over, but it was awesome, and it was mini disc, and it was something that had a handle to take to your friends, and it was just fun, and it had so many good games on it. And like, I don't know what else to say about it. It gets an A. And finishing off Generation 6, we have the original Xbox. And with this one, this was like the first brand new console I had ever gotten, and it was a lot of fun. It was great. It had great games. It had Xbox Live when that came out, and it was just an awesome experience to have. And overall, this one for me gets a B. Now for the start of Gen 7, we have the Xbox 360. And this one came out in 2005, and that was a global launch, came out for $300. And honestly, this console was absolutely phenomenal. The game library for it, what it was capable of doing, it was plagued by hardware issues in its original iteration, but they did 2 other iterations after that that worked amazingly. It was the first time where you could actually get HDMI proper on a console, and that was awesome. And overall, it was just a great console and great library. This one gets an A. Up next is the Sony PlayStation 3, and although this one definitely had really good games for it, and it was a cool console, and it was the first time we had Blu-ray in a gaming device, it was just, it was so expensive. I mean, it came out in 2006, and it launched for $500, so it was $200 more than other things that you could get, and it was the same kind of quality and fidelity, so there was really no point in getting something that expensive. Again, there were really cool games, really cool franchises that were on this console, but in my opinion, this console gets a B. And last up for Gen 7 is the Nintendo Wii, and this one really marked a kind of like culture shift for Nintendo consoles. They were always family-oriented consoles, but this one truly made everyone in the family involved, and people that had never picked up a video game in their entire life almost always had a Wii, and the Wii was amazing. They had a few different variations of it. It was backwards compatible with the GameCube, depending on which version of the console you had, and it had revolutionary controls for the time, and although the library has a lot of junk in it, it does have some really fantastic and phenomenal games, and I mean, it looks really good for what it is too. I mean, Nintendo consoles are never the most powerful, but they often have some of the best looking games. This console, for me, it gets an A. Now, first up for Gen 8 is the Nintendo Wii U, and this one was plagued by marketing issues and people not really understanding just what it was. Like, most people thought it was an upgraded Wii, and I mean, that's what the marketing would lead you to believe, but it was a whole new console. It wasn't just a refresh or anything like that. It was a whole new console. It released in 2012, and even though the console gets a lot of hate, honestly, I actually really like this console, and I thought it was a lot of fun. I really liked using the gamepad. I thought it was a very innovative design, and now in hindsight, you could see where Nintendo was starting to go leading up to the Switch. And again, I thought this was a really cool console. This one, for me, it gets a B. Now, here we have the Sony PS4, and this one came out in 2013, and honestly, this is where we started to truly reach the pinnacle of what modern gaming is. This console is amazing. It had a very fair price to it, and it has an absolutely amazing library to it, and because of all of that, for me, this console gets an S. And next up for Gen 8, we have the Xbox One. This came out in 2013, and this also had kind of a lot of hate at its launch, but overall, in my opinion, it's actually a pretty fantastic console. It's just, in my opinion, Microsoft tried too hard to make this the all-in-one like media device, and they had to do a lot of backtracking with the initial announcement as far as like always connected to the internet and all that, but overall, I mean, it was still a really good console. It's got a really solid library. It's not the best of the consoles in my opinion, but it's still a really just solid console. This one gets an A. And rounding out Gen 8, we have the Nintendo Switch, the world's first hybrid console. And honestly, I barely ever play mine docked. It's pretty much always handheld. But this is arguably the most successful product that Nintendo has ever launched. I mean, so far as of June 30th, 2023, we're at almost 130 million units sold. Still not the most successful of all time, but it is damn near close. And it has a massive library. It's an indie powerhouse, and the Switch is just absolutely fantastic. The Switch gets an S. And this brings us to the current generation, Generation 9. And first up, we have the Xbox Series X and S, which, in my opinion, is some of the stupidest naming that you could ever have, but here we are. These launched in 2020, and I personally have the Series X because I prefer physical media, and the console, it's really good. It's really powerful. I was a little put off at first by the design of it, but I mean, it's sleek and simple. And I mean, it's just another Xbox. Honestly, the software for this, the games, has been pretty lackluster since its launch, and we're already 3 years in, barely getting any kind of exclusives, and what we do get is either not what we were promised, or it's just, you know, not what it should be, like Halo Infinite. I mean, there was a lot of issues with that, and they've basically just kind of put those issues on the back burner, it feels like. And yeah, I mean, good console, it's cool, it plays stuff, you got Game Pass, things like that, but overall, I mean, I am not as impressed with it as I would have thought I would have been, and this console just gets a B. Now, last up, since Nintendo has not released a new console yet, probably in the next year or so to round out Gen 9, but we have the Sony PlayStation 5. And although, yes, it does look like a Wi-Fi router, I mean, it's still a phenomenal console. Came out in 2020 as well, and this one is packed with exclusives. And whether you're an Xbox, Nintendo, or PlayStation fanboy, it's hard to deny that the PS5 is actually a fantastic console. Just like with the Series X, there's a lot of promises made that have not been fulfilled, but at least with this, you know, you can upgrade stuff yourself on it, and all the rumors are saying that a more slimline model, or like a Pro model, is coming out, which that might be kind of cool. But in my opinion, with what has come out for this, it makes it just a bit better than the Xbox Series consoles, and for that reason, this gets an A.
So there you have it, everyone. That is every major console release in each generation, all the way from Generation 1 up through the current generation, which is Generation 9. Now, there are some really awesome consoles in there. There are some pretty okay ones, and there are some that just, in my opinion, aren't that great. But I want to know down in the comments below, what is your favorite console and what is your least favorite console? And if you like this video and you want to check out another ranking video that I just did, then go ahead and check out this video right here. And as always, I'm Game Dad. I thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you later.